So I'd like to understand a little better the crowd that we have here. Who is upset with the a show of hands, who is upset with the direction the country is heading? Who is upset with our education system? Great. Who wants to see Republicans take back the House and the Senate in 2022? Who is an FBI informant? Okay, only 3. That's pretty good. The FBI is not really following Attorney General Garland's directive that was just referenced. And it's easy to laugh at that, but it really is stunning, as the introduction noted, to have parents who maybe raise their voice a little like this at a school committee meeting, maybe get a little bit upset when the school committee cuts their microphone, who are seeking to protect their children, to be designated by the National School Board Association as the equivalent, read what they put out, the equivalent of domestic terrorists and hate crimes, hate criminals. And then within days, the Attorney General of the United States acts on their demands. When does that ever happen? It shows you the power of the organized educational bureaucracy in this country. They tell the Attorney General of the US what to do, and his response is, they say jump, and his response is, how high? That sends a very chilling message to people. And that's really the message that I want to bring forward tonight, because I'm not a real captivating speaker, but I see what's going on. And what you are all involved in, or parents are involved in, is really a movement to save the country. This is not about what's happening in one school. It's what's happening across the country. If you wanted to devise a way to rip this country apart, what would you do differently than what they are doing? What would you do? You would teach children that the single most important aspect of their life and society is the color of their skin. You would set children against each other based on the color of their skin. You would set them against their parents based on skin color. You would set them against their country based on skin color. And that is really what is going on in the schools. People use the phrase critical race theory, and then you get the people say, oh, well, we're going to get into an argument of what the meaning of is, like the old Bill Clinton line. Well, is this critical race theory or is this not critical race theory? Oh, critical race theory is an academic theory developed at the Ivy League law schools. It's only we don't teach critical race theory. And they're right. You will never find a 3rd grade book called Critical Race Theory. What you will do is you will find an absolute obsession over skin color and an absolute obsession over the destiny of children in the society being tied to that skin color. And make no mistake about it, when they shame white children, when they seek to tell white children that they bear a special burden in society because of their skin color, they are also shaming black children and non-white children. Because the message they are sending is that those non-white children are destined to fail in the society, that their futures are hopeless because of their skin color. And we all know that's not true. We can't allow that ever to be true. But that is the message they are sending. The critical race theory thing is really very much tied into my history of education. So I graduated Harvard Law School in 1984, which is around the years that critical legal theory, which became critical race theory, was birthed at Harvard Law School in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So I've been aware of this essentially my whole career. And the education system was taken over by the people pushing those theories. The bulk of the students, 98%, 99%, went to law firms or business or wherever they happened to go, government. But that 1% went into academia. And when I look at the trajectory, I didn't start off in academia. I was in private practice for over 22 years before I moved over to a law school. But if I look at my classmates and I see their trajectory, it was the most radical students who all went into academia. And one of those radical students was my classmate, who invented, or is generally credited with inventing, critical race theory. And Kimberly Crenshaw was my classmate in law school. She went into academia, and I went into law firms and cases, and most of my classmates did. And what we did for at least a generation, however many years you want to consider a generation to be, but at least for 35 years, we turned our children over to these people. We abandoned our children to a public education system which became increasingly radical. It is no surprise that the Bill Ayers of the world, the former Weather Underground, mentor of Barack Obama, went into academia and education. And they really have taken control, and it is a bad situation. I don't want to kid you about that. One of the things we do is we have written extensively and investigated extensively about the money and the groups who are pushing this. It is massive. It is hundreds of groups fueled by hundreds of millions of dollars who are devoted towards pushing variations on critical race theory to children. Now, they don't call it critical race theory. They might call it, quote unquote, anti-racism, which the way they use the term, that's possibly the greatest linguistic sleight of hand that we've ever seen, because what they advocate under the anti-racism is in fact extremely racist, and it was the most notable purveyor of that teaches at, I think it's Boston University, and makes millions of dollars off of this. They might call it equity, they might call it diversity, equity, inclusion, they might call it, what's the phrase that they're using now?
Cultural responsive teaching.
Culturally responsive teaching, that's the new one. They will never call it critical race theory, because that's become a toxic term. And that has really been taken over. We focused on one group and wrote up about one particular group called the Future of Learning. And the Future of Learning is a coalition of over 300 groups. It's funded in part by the National Education Association, which has 2 members on the Future of Learning Steering Committee. And they are pushing on this stuff, and they even have a messaging guide. So when you as a parent, you're going to hear their messaging guide when you go. They'll talk about how they're not teaching critical race theory, they're just seeking to inject truth into the classrooms. And we should trust students to learn material. And that all of this opposition is some sort of vast right-wing conspiracy. And that what we really want to do is we want to stop any discussion of racism. We don't want them to teach history. If you go to their messaging guide, these are all their talking points. They actually have a messaging guide for their membership. And so, and they are funded by major foundations. Name brand foundations are pouring money into this. National Education Association, which for months and months said, well, critical race theory is not being taught in schools, you're making this up, it's not a reality, then announced that, well, it is and we support it and it should be in all 14,000 school districts. American Federation of Teachers, which said, oh, this is not happening, this is make-believe, this is some right-wing talking point, it's not happening, also announced that they are going to devote their resources to hiring lawyers to defend teachers who were disciplined for teaching critical race theory. So if it's not being taught, why do you have to hire lawyers to defend teachers for it? So there is enormous money behind this. So whenever you hear the claim that this is astroturf, that's what they use against the Tea Party, and that's what they use against this parent movement now. Understand that the people who are saying that are programmed. They have messaging guides, they have public relations consultants, they have messaging consultants, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. Yet despite that, look at how fearful they are at moms and dads who stand up at a school board committee. These people with tens and hundreds of millions of dollars behind them, with the largest teachers' unions in the country behind them, with many politicians behind them, actually shake in fear when a mom gets up there and says, I don't want you teaching my child that all that matters is his or her skin color. I don't want you doing this stuff. And they absolutely shake, and they run to the Attorney General of the United States and they say, shut it down. Brand them domestic terrorists. Invoke the Patriot Act against them. Because they know they have a losing message. And they know that the parents who are objecting are right. And this is a crossover issue, and that's what scares them. This is not Democrat versus Republican, it's not conservative versus liberal, it's parental rights, and that cuts across all communities. And it's very important that when we talk about this, that while it is true that the Democratic Party is the home of this movement, that doesn't mean that all Democrats are on board with it. And that doesn't mean that we have to portray this in a partisan way. And it's certainly not a black versus white movement. One of the things that has happened is that the largest percentage of growth in homeschooling, the largest percentage of people who are pulling their kids out of the public school systems are African American parents. Wow. So this is why they're so scared, and this is why they want the federal government to shut it down. And this is why, if they haven't already, they're going to turn to big tech to shut down groups, because they are so afraid. And so keep that in mind, that this is really a universal concern that parents have. I don't know any parent, much less any group of parents that you could categorize by race or skin color or ethnicity, who don't want their children to learn math properly. Right. I mean, can you imagine teaching children, particularly non-white children, that showing your proof in math is racist and is a sign of white oppression? I mean, what damage are you doing to those children by not allowing them to properly learn math? And I don't know any group in this country that wants that. And when the light gets shown on these things, that is when they really get nervous. So let me tell you a little bit about my history. I told you about Harvard Law School. I was there at the birth of it was actually called at the time critical legal theory, and it became critical race theory. So I'm very familiar with it, and I've always followed it. I started Legal Insurrection website in 2008, and that name, of course, now is maybe a little bit controversial. It wasn't in 2008, so I always like to tell people how I got that name. And the way I got it is that I had joined Cornell Law School in 2007. I guarantee you, they never would have hired me if I had that website before they hired me. So I started it about 10 months after they hired me. And I was having dinner. I used to be a plaintiff's contingency fee securities lawyer, and with a client I'd won a lot of money for, and we'd never spoken politics. If you had Googled me, all you would have found is I won this case, I lost that case, I was on this bar committee, I gave this presentation, whatever it was. And even though I'd known him for many years, we never spoke politics. And having dinner with him in late August or so of 2008, and he says, who are you voting for? I said, well, I'm voting for John McCain and Sarah Palin. And when the word Sarah Palin rolled off my lips, I saw steam coming out, and we argued for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, he said, you know, you haven't changed my mind, but I've never heard anybody explain your side as clearly as you did. It was either him or his daughter said, you should start like a blog. And I didn't know what a blog was. I didn't follow blogs. So I went to Google Blogger because it was free and really basic. And I said, okay, now I need a name. Well, what am I feeling? Like word association. And the word insurrection came to my mind. Now, whoever's taking notes here, that's not the end of the story. And I looked it up, and an insurrection by definition is illegal. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I'm a law professor now. Maybe a name that's illegal isn't the best thing, so I'll call it legal insurrection, which actually is a contradiction in terms. And that's how I got the name. And over time, we grew. I was alone on this blog for a couple of years, got a lot of notoriety. One thing that's very interesting, my first post was October 12th of 2008. By the end of October, the law school was already getting emails from people who wanted me fired within 3 weeks. And that kept up a steady pace for several years. Not every day or every week, but enough that looking back, I can say it was kind of steady. And what was I saying? I was basically saying mainstream conservative stuff, critiques of Obama and Obamacare and things like that. Nothing crazy. And that kept up. People threatened to boycott the law school, organize boycotts if they didn't get rid of me. One year, threats were such that the university assigned a university police detective to accompany me to graduation because they were afraid of a disruption. And I look back on it, and who was doing this? I mean, a lot of it was anonymous, but a lot of it wasn't. They used their real names and their regular emails because they were so unafraid of trying to get me fired or harassing people, okay, in the law school, how they have to get rid of me. And I'd done a lot on the anti-Israel movement. These weren't, anti-Israel activists, okay? These weren't anarchists. These weren't communists. These were mainstream Obama-supporting liberals who were so secure in their position that they didn't mind using their own names to try to get me fired. And that continued for many years. And as a website, we continued to grow, and we got involved at that time. We don't anymore because we're a 501c3, but we got involved in politics. We were very involved in Scott Brown's first race against Martha Coakley. We were the only one really on the ground covering it. And in December, I'm like kind of screaming to people, this thing's winnable. And everybody's, no, the last poll is down 25 points. No, this is actually winnable. And then we got very involved in his second run, which he lost to Elizabeth Warren. And we were extremely involved in that and extremely involved in documenting our problems. The other website you need to go to, which I founded in 2013, is called ElizabethWarrenWiki.org. ElizabethWarrenWiki.org. We pulled together, she won, we pulled together all the research we did, all the research the Cherokee genealogist did, proving that she has no Native American heritage. We pulled all of this stuff together, and I said, I can't just let this disappear into the internet. So we created a website that looks like Wikipedia, and it's ElizabethWarrenWiki.org with absolutely devastating takedowns of a lot of her positions and exposés on things that most people don't know about her. And the funny thing is that it became a huge hit with Bernie Sanders supporters during the 2020 election cycle, because it was so well documented, and everything was new, everything was sourced, and whenever possible we used mainstream sources, not our own, not quote unquote right-wing sources. Nobody has ever pointed to a single fact on that website, which is quite extensive, that we got wrong, and that is kind of what we do. We're a very deep research entity. We became a 501c3 in 2018 and actually launched in 2019. And then we created criticalrace.org, which we rolled out in the first week of February of this year, actually. It seems like it was longer ago. And why did we do that? Well, I've been following a lot of different politics sort of things and issues involving race, etc. And there was attempts to get me fired in June of 2020 because I was critical of the rioting and the looting that took place after George Floyd's death. And I had the temerity to point out a historical truth, which is that hands up, don't shoot, which became the signature slogan of the Black Lives Matter movement, actually is a fabrication. Michael Brown did not have his hands up. was not saying don't shoot when he was shot by the police in Ferguson in 2014, but that has become the designated slogan. In fact, he punched a policeman in the face and tried to steal his weapon, and that's why he was shot dead. And so those two things, kind of cancel culture, came down on me. But then in July of 2020, the president of Cornell University announced that we were going to become essentially, quote unquote, anti-racist campus. And I hadn't really heard that phrase before. Well, I consider myself anti-racist. I think the vast majority of people in the country do. But I didn't really understand what she meant by it. And she assigned, or she promoted, a book that was going to be the subject for students of summer reading and would be the subject then of discussion groups when they returned to campus. And it was made available to people free. If you had a Cornell ID, you could log in and you could read it online. And that book was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And that was my first exposure. And I start reading this thing. I was like, oh my God, this is like horrible. This is actually advocating discrimination. This is advocating racial discrimination. His most famous line, I think, is current discrimination to remedy past discrimination, future discrimination to remedy current discrimination. So I'm reading this and saying, this is pretty awful. And so we began to research it. We have researchers who work for us. And at first I was going to write an op-ed or an article. And then we began to realize, this is actually all over the place. This is everywhere. And so, but we're just researching it. And then in the fall of, in early September of 2020, pursuant to the president's guidance that we were to become an anti-racist campus, several hundred faculty, students, and staff signed a set of demands as to what they believed the president's anti-racism initiative should look like on campus. And some of the things they advocated were outright unlawful under the anti-discrimination laws, like hiring based on race, promotion based on race. And that's when we decided as a group, we said, you know what, this is out of control. I mean, you have some prominent professors at Cornell University. Maybe you haven't heard of them, but at least on campus they're prominent. Signing on to a document like this. This is really bad. So we decided as a foundation we would create a website. It took us some time to do the research, and our goal was to have it live before the election. And it didn't work out. We ran into troubles with the database that we were creating. And we said, okay, the election will be over. Maybe early December. It should be quiet after the election. and then it didn't quite get quiet, and then we said, well, okay, maybe as we move into mid-December or early January, the news cycle won't be so crazy and we can actually get a little bit of attention here, and obviously that didn't happen. And then we found a sweet spot between the inauguration and the second impeachment. This is how crazy the world is. Between the inauguration and the second impeachment of somebody who's no longer president, okay? We found that week when the news was not completely insane. And we rolled out the website. I was very fortunate enough to have it announced on Tucker Carlson's show on a Thursday night at 8:30. And we still thought this would just be a nice little project of the Legal Insurrection Foundation. We'll do it, we'll get a little bit of attention, and we'll move on. Between 8:30 and midnight, we had 400,000 visits to the website. And understand that this is not, if you're familiar, I never go there anymore, but if you recall, like Drudge, okay, it's not like a Drudge link where you just click on something and it takes you to a website. People actually had to type into their browser criticalrace.org. And Tucker was very kind and said it 3 or 4 times. I said it 3 or 4 times. And by the next day we had 1 million visits. And then we knew we were on to something here. What was going to be a little project of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, we tapped into something going on in this country that we had no idea was going on. And since then, that movement I call it a liberation movement, to liberate our education system from this ideology, has grown leaps and bounds. A lot of new groups have come into it, and I always say be careful about that, because where there's donor money and there's money, there will be people who come in to scoop it up. But for the most part, from what I've observed, most of the people involved are legitimately interested. A lot of the groups are run by mothers, seem to be more prominent than fathers. Mothers seem to be leading this movement. I mean, this is a movement pretty much of mothers defending their children. And it is extremely, extremely powerful. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what can we do? How do we face off against this? Because it seems like all the forces are aligned against us. Well, the one thing you can do is you can support each other. When you have a teacher or a coach or somebody else who is fired or disciplined or attacked, reach out to them, support each other. As somebody who was the focus of a firestorm at Cornell Law School in June of 2020, those emails of support are really helpful. And so support each other. Run for school board, run for school committee, run for PTA, whatever you can do. I don't care what you do, but do something. And when you have millions, maybe tens of millions of people willing to do something, that becomes very powerful. And so I think that it's an all hands on deck sort of thing. And different people have different strengths. Somebody might not want to put themselves out there and have to deal with the false accusations that will be made against them. And it's very painful when you're subjected to those, because you know you're not what they're claiming, okay? That it's almost like an out-of-body experience. I can tell you, like, okay, they're talking about this really, really horrible person, and then you realize they're talking about you, okay? But do something. I don't really care what it is. Support candidates who support your positions. Network with Democrats who agree with you on this issue. They may disagree with you on everything else, but on this issue you can cross over. Police your own movement. I saw this with the Tea Party, and we're seeing it now in the way people are trying to demonize this movement. We were kind of a Tea Party blog, never affiliated with any group, but we started in the fall of 2008, which was kind of at the start of the Tea Party movement. So I followed the Tea Party movement, and what you had is you could have 4,000 people at a rally with 1,500 signs. They would find the one crazy sign, and that would be plastered all over TV. And you know what? We were able to document that some of those were plants. Some of those were people they sent to rallies so that they could get photos and video of them that would then dominate the news cycle. You probably don't recall, but after she lost the election, Sarah Palin started a website and a group, a website called Democratic Underground, which I think still exists, organized a movement to go to her website and plant racist comments in the comment section. Why? So they could say, look who her supporters are. So if you're going to have a Facebook group and somebody starts talking trash, kick them out. Yeah. Okay? Kick them right out. If they show up at a meeting and they start talking trash, kick them out. You have to self-police. So that's another sort of warning sign. Don't give up. They want you to give up. They want you to feel hopeless. But look around this room, go to any school board meeting, start Facebook groups, go to Facebook groups. There are more of you than there are union officials. Okay? There are more of you than there are academics pushing this stuff. They may have more money, okay, and I don't want to underestimate the forces behind this and the money behind this, coming from billionaires whose names you know. But there are more of you, and so keep it up, do something, get active, make this a crossover issue, and never, never, ever let them turn you against each other, okay? Because that's what they're gonna try to do. So I hope I haven't disappointed you, but what I'm really interested in is hearing questions and feedback, because that's what I like to do more than anything.
Continue to film questions.
Thank you.
Well, I had a first question. Somebody mentioned to me earlier today, and I think Legal Insurrection talked about it today, the connection between Merrick Garland's son-in-law and CRT.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is documented, that his son-in-law is with the publishing company that provides a lot of the materials. Whether that is what is motivating him, I don't know, but it certainly seems to be an apparent conflict of interest. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. But I think I don't think that is necessarily motivating him. I mean, he has been on the demonization of political opposition basically since he became Attorney General. The first time we wrote about what he was doing was, I think it was back in June or July, I forget when it was, when the same sort of rhetoric that now is being used was used by him against political opponents. So he's a problem. And I wrote a post, and I want you all to say, thank you, Mitch McConnell, for keeping this guy off the Supreme Court.
I'll try to reach you. Right here.
So, thank you for coming up. It's been great. We're sitting way down back, we can hear you fine. When you mentioned critical legal theory, is that when they first started pushing equity?
I think equity is a more current term that is used because they love terminology that means the opposite of what they say it means. And equity sounds like equality, but it's not. Equity means discriminating against people on the basis of race so that you get an equal outcome. So I don't recall that long ago the term equity being used, but it might have been.
Well, what I meant by that was equity as a legal theory versus justice as a legal theory. Any familiarity with that?
Well, I can't recall whether that was the foundation. I mean, critical legal theory looked at the structures of society as being systemically geared towards entrenching the economic powers in the country. Critical race theory took that and applied that to race, said that we are systemically a system that perpetuates racial discrimination. So that is what those two mean.
So I don't know if this is quite your field, but I'm interested about the rich people that cover the costs of these various groups. What is their benefit that they do this for? What's their bottom line? What's their return in doing this, you know?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot, and it's often framed in terms of what do those people, or why are the unions doing this? What is in it for them? And I think the way I break it down is that a certain percentage are simply true believers. They believe this stuff. They believe the country is irredeemably and systemically racist, and so they believe it. They actually believe it. I'd say that you probably have another segment who just go along, get along. I mean, they're afraid. It's easier to agree with the prevailing ideology, and so they just go along with it. But then you have a group who's in it for power and money. And I put the unions in the power, and the money. There is an enormous industry of consultants, publishers, and others who make a lot of money from this. Ibram Kendi was paid by my town in Rhode Island, Barrington, Rhode Island. They actually got a foundation to pay it, but he was sponsored by the town council. About $15,000 for a 1-hour chat in which he maybe spoke for 15 or 20 minutes. And you see school districts, so you have diversity consultants, diversity companies who get paid enormous sums of money to provide programming and training, and so they advocate for these things, and they are a very powerful lobby. So I say, you got the true believers, you got the go along to get along, and then you've got the power and money interests that are pushing this.
Thank you. How do we, as parents and just individuals all over the state, how do we obtain the curriculum from our individual school boards and school committees so we could have 1 or 2 people from every single 351 municipalities in Massachusetts get the curriculum? Is there a legal form? Is there a letter?
Well, most states, and I assume Massachusetts does, I'm more familiar with Rhode Island, have public records laws, the equivalent of the Federal Freedom of Information Act at the state level, that allow you to submit public records requests to your school district for materials. And that has been a big area that a lot of people have used. And the school districts, I can tell you, because we have filed these, completely play games with what they give you. They'll come back and say, oh, you want that? It's going to be $9,000 because we have to spend a certain number of person hours on it, and copying and redacting, and then when you finally do pay your $700 or $800, you get back, like we did from a school district, over 2,500 pages, completely blacked out. Okay? You would think this was like the nuclear code to our missiles, okay? And so we're going to continue to fight that, but they get delayed. Okay, what should have been given to us in 10 business days may end up taking us 10 months to get if we ever get it. And so this is the gains, but there are public records requests. There are groups that advocate on how to do that. Journalists do use those all the time. I can't tell you specifically what to ask for, but keep it narrow. If you ask for a truckload of material, you'll be told it's $70,000. So try to understand. But one of the things we advocate, and you all could advocate to your state reps, is an academic or educational transparency law that requires that school districts post a lot of their stuff on the website, and that makes it easier for parental access. That is a very big movement, and I'm much more in favor of that than I am, quote unquote, banning something. In fact, there's in the news today, the American Federation of Teachers Pennsylvania affiliate or chapter is opposing a bill that's being debated in the Pennsylvania state legislature for educational transparency. And what are they saying? Oh, we can't do that because look, the Attorney General is talking about a fear of domestic terrorism. If we have to give them educational materials, we're going to be attacked by these domestic terrorists. So what Merrick Garland did was particularly pernicious, because it's pernicious on its face, but it's also pernicious in how it can be used by people to silence parents. But you can file those requests.
Hello, thank you. My name is Dasha Videra. I'm from Franklin, Massachusetts. I am currently running for our school committee right now. I'm definitely the person I think that have walked over the line to declare like war in my town, which is fine. I'm okay with that. But my background is in psychology. My graduate degree is in organizational leadership. I actually homeschool my kids. I have 4 children. I'm in a very difficult situation because, of course, like the status quo and the norm is not who I am in any way, shape, and form. CRT, something I've been following for the last few years. I've kind of mentally been preparing to even choose to run. But as I've been doing that and kind of raising the awareness on that, the wording has dramatically changed to DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So recently, actually, our superintendent of public schools in Franklin went before the board to go and present, what they're planning on implementing within the school. And it's really unfortunate because they had certain stories and people, students that were coming to share stories to reinforce DEI. The concern, though, is that the superintendent has also partnered with our state representative, and then it's called Safe Coalition, which is to talk about the mental health crisis that we're in, but also how it's paved a way for addiction, and the addiction has obviously increased dramatically, especially since COVID. So now it seems as if what Franklin is looking to do is kind of take advantage of this situation on a mental health standpoint to reinforce DEI, and they're utilizing the platform of Franklin Public Schools in hopes of other schools following the same trend. So then that way they're now teaching the mental health crisis within the schools at a more personal level to, of course, reinforce, I would say, counselors, therapists, psychiatrists to actually work more individual with the families specifically. So the COVID funding that they would be getting would be going to that directly. So the concern, of course, that I have is as I continue to raise the awareness around CRT and DEI, parents actually in some way, especially if they're like on a completely different wavelength than I think most of us are here, believe that this thing is actually utilizing it because the kids are emotionally challenged. I mean, that is, I've seen a couple of really disservicing things happen to some of the kids because of what they had gone through over the last school year. Just, they're maxed out. So the parents are actually looking for help, so they're prying now on parents asking for help, offering a solution. So I guess what would be your recommendation of how to kind of navigate that a little bit?
I think it's tough. I think one thing we have seen, as you just noted, is that the terminology will change, the tactics will change, the focus will change. And it's very tough. I think you've just got to keep current with what it is. You've got to publicize it, you've got to call attention to it, but it is a very tough situation, and I don't downplay it at all. There are people who are very heavily invested in making race the singular focus, and they find different ways of going about it. I mean, the good news is that critical race theory has become a toxic term, which is why they're running from it. And the concepts behind it that are now being utilized are also very toxic to most parents. And so it's just calling people's attention to it. But it is a tough situation. I'm not going to kid anybody.
Hi, I just had a question on, I'd like to request some clarification on something you mentioned earlier about policing our own websites or Facebook groups or whatever. Do you mean for like comments that suggest or encourage illegal activity or just unpopular speech, which would be like a violation of free speech in that sense?
Yes, well there's a couple of things that and something we face on our website. Obviously there are certain bright lines. You can't dox somebody, you can't post their personal information, you can't threaten violence, you can't advocate violence. But when you get into a group that is advocating equality and trying to organize, I don't think you need to tolerate people who are expressing racist views. We may disagree on whether a particular statement is or isn't, but this is your advocacy group. I think you're entitled to control your group. That's a little different than platforms that have billions of people participating, like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, which really have become the equivalent of the public square. So I think individual groups are entitled to police and keep their website on their message. But I think I am an advocate for free speech in the public square, on the university campus, and on the large platforms that now are the central basis on which we exchange ideas. But I do think individual groups, particularly if you're a closed group as opposed to a public group, I think have the ability and the right to police themselves. And I think, because if you don't, there will be provocateurs, there will be what we call trolls who come, and trolling to me, I mean, we see it all the time, and it seems to have increased a lot in the last month or two, at least at our website. We've been very cautious. You know, somebody shows up just saying really strange stuff who's never been on the website before. Is this somebody who's really expressing a view, or is this somebody who is trying to post something on our website so somebody else can accuse us of something? And so it's a very tricky situation. I'm an advocate for free speech, but that doesn't mean, I mean, the analogy I would use is that if you're on the street in front of my house, you have the right to say pretty much anything you want, even if I don't like it, as long as you're not advocating something that's immediately illegal, immediate violence or something like that. But that doesn't mean you have the right to come into my living room and say it. And that's where I draw the line. So I draw the line, you don't have the right to come into my living room and say whatever you want, but on the street, in a public forum like that, yes. In any specific case, that can be a difficult judgment call. But I think if you don't police yourselves, you're going to end up like Sarah Palin's website, where people are going to come and say stuff, not because they actually believe it, but because they're trying to set you up. And so that's just the reality.
Hi, could you just speak a little bit about educational vouchers?
I think a lot of people wonder, and I'm glad you brought that up, whether it's vouchers, what will change the system that we're in now? And I think parental choice would change the system. If parents could vote with their feet as to where their children get to go to school, you would introduce market forces into the public school system that don't currently exist, and you would lessen the power of the educational bureaucracy which controls those schools, because students would have the money to go elsewhere, and there would be competition. So I'm a very big fan. How it works in a particular case might vary, but I am a very big fan of school choice and school vouchers and educational freedom for students.
Thank you, sir. I have a quick question mainly about your suggestion about running for school committee. So here in Massachusetts, my understanding is that the Department of Education, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education sets the standards and requirements and frameworks, and that the superintendent is tasked to ensure that all those curriculum materials are met. So my understanding is, what actual legal and what leverage does the school committee actually have over curriculum? Like, if we want to take some kind of position in the school committee, how can we actually positively affect the curriculum?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work in Massachusetts, but in many places, school committees do have more authority. They have authority over hiring, authority over whether it's curriculum, programming, things like that. I'm not sure what it is here, but if school committees weren't important, the other side wouldn't go to such lengths to make sure they control the school committees. The unions wouldn't go to such lengths to make sure their supporters were on the school committee if the school committees had no power. So I can't give you specifics in a particular district, what influence they have on curriculum, except that it is one of the most important mechanisms to keep an eye on. And I've seen that in Rhode Island, that the school committees have exerted a lot of power over what happens.
Hi there. I just have a couple of comments and a question. So this is really excellent. You're doing a great job. But I'm proud to say in Dedham here we are mobilizing to fight critical race theory. So we have a lot of support for this tonight. The Franklin parent, about this. Public schools are not meant to be clinics and hospitals, so if a parent has a problem with their child and their mental health, I would advise you to have them speak to the pediatrician instead. So that's one of my comments that I have for you as well, is about social emotional learning and how that all came about. So I think in the beginning, SEL was really a positive attribute that public schools has been now. It is just taking over, and it's definitely part of critical race theory. And a lot of times schools now, you see social emotional learning, and then they're giving you kids surveys, right? So I'm telling all the parents to make sure that you email your principal or your child's teacher and tell them that any surveys that are being given to your child, that you want to opt in to those surveys. Right now, the rule is that you have to opt out of these surveys. And there's so many surveys going on now, and they're very intrusive to a family and to a student, and it goes back to that Panorama company in Boston. I know North Carolina is fighting to get Panorama survey out of that state. There's a few other really awesome groups to follow and websites, including yours. Parents Defending Education, No Left Turn. Massachusetts has a chapter. There's also Educational Alliance of North Carolina. So we have a board now that one of them has come out and said that they are not teaching critical race theory. They do call it cultural responsive teaching instead. And also last night at the school committee meeting, we had an administrator who said that, you know, cultural responsive teaching must be okay because it came from the college level. So it came from Harvard University, so it must be okay, right? So.
But this is a good example of how you can propose things, maybe to your school committee, that are on their face neutral. Who would be against parents having to opt in rather than opt out? Right? Well, that's a neutral policy. And that your school committee probably has the authority to pass a resolution that any surveys that are done related to mental health or other issues must obtain parental consent.
That's a great idea. I'm going to do that.
And so if there are that's the same with educational transparency. It's not a political issue, although some people oppose it because they don't like others to know what's going on. But educational transparency doesn't tell the school what to teach, doesn't tell them what they can't teach. It's just saying that a parent shouldn't have to file a public records request, shouldn't have to spend 10 months trying to get basic materials on what's going on in school. And those are issues that are very powerful and can have a huge impact that are not Republican versus Democrat, because this is Massachusetts. I'm in Rhode Island, okay? If you portray something as Republican versus Democrat, Republicans are going to lose almost every time. So find those crossover issues. Find those. Why would a parent, a registered Democrat parent, want their kids subjected to intrusive surveys that include things about home life? Okay? What business is that of the school? That's not a Republican versus a Democrat thing. We're not even saying they can't do the surveys. But the parent has to opt in as opposed to opting out. Simple issue. That would have an enormous impact on this whole CRT movement because they are dependent on parents being kept in the dark about what's happening at school.
Parents are still naive.
You know, I heard somebody say, and it makes sense to me, that one of the reasons they've been able to get away with so much is that so much of teaching now is electronic. That it used to be the kids would come home with a book, okay? You didn't need a public records request to see the book because they brought it home in their backpack. You didn't need it to see their test. You didn't need it to see their assignments because the kids would come home. Now you see none of that. It's all done on tablets and it's all done at school where you can't see it. And I think that is one of the reasons in the last 10 plus years they've been able to get away with so much, because that paper trail is no longer available to parents.
Hi, so I got very interested in what's going on in my kids' school when I heard that they were doing a new identity unit starting last year, and they even bought this book is Anti-Racist, which is basically Abraham Kendi for middle school. Yeah. But then when I started seeing them actually coming home with the assignments, what I'm starting to realize, it's not actually critical race theory, which at least my district is teaching anymore. It's actually closer to a queer theory. If you look at all the critical theories, that's where most of the material is coming from. And I know my teachers aren't smart enough to make this up on their own. So, so clearly someone is pushing this and it's going widespread because they just picked it up. It's also apparently part of the Massachusetts frameworks, because when I challenge them on this, you know, why are you teaching them that your family is just the people you like to spend time with? Where is this coming from? They're like, oh, we're just teaching the Massachusetts frameworks. This unit is entirely Massachusetts framework. So I'm just wondering whether you're hearing the switch from anyone else.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the concerns that parents have, there is an interconnection between the critical race theory and the critical gender theory that's being pushed. And that is upsetting to a lot of parents as well. There's a very famous, now famous person in Rhode Island, a mom from South Kingstown, who we brought forward on my website, and then she kind of went national. And her antennas were raised when she had a her oldest child was going to enter kindergarten, was not yet in kindergarten, and she contacted the school and wanted to see the curriculum. And they like shut her down. And then she did manage to speak to one of the kindergarten teachers who mentioned, oh, well, you know, we don't call the kids boys and girls anymore. And she said, well, what do you call them? What do you, well, we don't use gender terms anymore for kindergartners. And that got her attention. And so they told her to file public records requests if she wants the information, and she did it. And she filed, in their view, too many, and they threatened to sue her, and the rest is history. But the point is that a lot of parents are concerned that at the youngest ages, that critical gender theory is also being pushed. I try to keep the two separate, but the reality is you probably can't in the school systems.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Rayla Campbell. You should know that by now. Hi. And I'm running for Secretary of State, but critical race theory is really important to me because I have 3 mixed children who are Irish. Where are my Irish people? So I pulled my kids out of public schools very, very early, and they've been in Catholic schools up until the pandemic, and now I homeschool them. But my daughter in elementary school, she was only in kindergarten, went to school and came home and was like, Mommy, 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 I learned about Martin Luther King. And I'm like, awesome, that's so great. What did you learn, baby? And she said, I learned he was killed by a white man. My heart sunk. I was livid. You have never seen Diary of a Mad Black Woman until you saw what I went up to that school and did. I got the superintendent, I got the school board, I got the principal, I had the teachers. The principal ended up agreeing with me 100%. The superintendent ended up leaving the school. I pulled my kids out of that school and took 129 parents with me and their children. It bothers me so much when we hear this crazy racial trash that is being pushed in our schools, especially because we are Massachusetts. We are #1 in everything. Why are we allowing Harvard and all of these Ivy League schools to tell us what we already know what is best for our children? We know how to protect our children. We know what we fought for. We know that it was Irish need not apply, no guineas allowed, blacks only. And we all worked together to be unified and ended up having mixed babies. Beautiful babies. Thank you. Thank you. My question to you is, how are we reaching those mixed parents? And where are these mixed parents out there saying, this is crap? I have been silenced. I have been muted off of all the Zoom meetings. I have been chased away by police. I am media, so I have a media pass and I can legally be in all these meetings. And Antifa came to my town and had a secret meeting to bring Planned Parenthood into the high school as a community health center, because our high school is half empty. There are 5 elementary schools, all teaching different curriculum. I requested the curriculum and got back teacher ratings, which were all 0s. That actually shows exactly what you're doing, because Randolph is so underperforming when you see, and we did a Proposition 2.0 override. And our schools have dramatically, first on the lines, and then the other parents who are just like, I'm just not gonna even deal with that. A lot of us black parents are standing up and we're saying stuff, but apparently Black lives don't matter anymore. So, yeah, for me it is, how are you gonna be able to reach more people in the African American community, which is the American community? Let's not talk about color. Because this that they're pushing, it is hurting all children. And it is making black children feel a way that we've already been oppressed, we've already gone through slavery, and I'm just talking about the African American slaves, not these other people that identify because of the color. No, I'm direct descendant of slaves, and we got an education. Our slave owners left us their property. My great-grandma had this massive plantation down in South Carolina. I used to get lost in that house in the wells. Somebody help me. But yeah, this is what we need to be reaching out to the people in the Black community. And I know that a lot of the people are like, oh, well, I'm too afraid or whatever. But the Black people need us to come there. They want us to show that we actually don't want this. They think, oh, because you have BLM and Antifa and all of these people from Chicago who are running our policies here in Massachusetts, which we cannot allow anymore, and we need our patriots to stand up. But how are you going to reach the Black communities when we know that the Democrats want to silence our voices so much?
I think that's one of the challenges, and that's why I think parents on the ground and your groups need to reach out to other groups and need to form coalitions. And you know, in terms of my website, we do the best we can. People should spread the link, okay? legalinsurrection.com. Get people involved. But it's tough because segregating people is one of the tactics that are used by the people's proponents of critical race theory and these different racial theories. They want people to be separated. They don't want them to come together. And like I said, this is a completely crossover issue, because if you look at the statistics, and I haven't looked at them currently, but within the last year or two, I did see a lot of the statistics on interracial marriages are, I don't know if it's the majority yet, but it is rising very fast. Most people in this country don't want to judge other people based on the color of their skin. They want to look for something deeper and something more meaningful. And so, you know, if you have a mixed race child, on the identity wheel they're going to put on the wall, where do they fit? Okay? And I think that, you know, the rates of intermarriage are extremely high and growing. And so, and that is what I think scares the other side, because they recognize that this is a crossover issue, not only politically, but racially and ethnically. So I would say, if you have groups, reach out. And if, you know, reach out to groups in other towns, maybe towns where there's a higher minority percentage, and try to find parents there. You've got to do it. It's not just going to happen on its own.
Thank you so much for coming this evening. I would like to say that I was one of those 400,000 people who clicked on your link on the Tucker Carlson show. And I was shocked, because I thought it was just a college thing, and then I found it in our local school system, and it really terrified me, to the point that I did run for school committee last year. Came in 5th, but we're running again this year, and we're going to come in first. Yes, we are, because we've got a lot of great parents behind us. I also am an admin on the Dedham Parents Advocating Facebook page. If you're interested, get involved. Even if you're not in Dedham, we're gonna work together to make all of our communities safer for all of our kids. I do have a question for you. You talk about the playbook. How do we get that playbook so that when we do go to school committee meetings, we have an ability to ask questions that they have to answer? So many of our questions go unanswered, and it's the mechanics of you didn't ask the right way, or you asked it in a way that they could prevent answering it straightly.
Well, at criticalrace.org, we do have pages with these sort of resources. We've expanded a lot. We started off originally focusing on higher ed. And one of that first night, from the moment we went public, our contact form was overloaded with people asking questions about K through 12. And that's really where the energy is in the country. And so we have a lot of resources and links to groups there which have those materials. We haven't produced them on our own because we don't want to just reinvent the wheel. We have limited resources and we don't want to reinvent with others. But on our pages at that website, we have a lot of links to groups that have that sort of, if you want to call it a playbook, because you have to ask the question in the right way or you won't get an answer.
Hi, thanks so much for coming tonight. I also wanted to ask, kind of piggybacking on the mental health piece, which I feel like is kind of a sort of another divisive tactic. If you can make the parents seem crazy for questioning this stuff, but yet the kids are starting to be indoctrinated, but then you're pairing mental health help with these critical race DEI initiatives, the waters become very murky. So when you answered about resources on your website, are you referring to resources that parents and groups can use to help get, let's say, legal guidance about what their rights are? And if that's not what you're referring to, what can you advise, especially in the climate now where DOJ and FBI are looking at parents who you know, so sort of
That's a really good thing, and you've just given me an idea, which is we need to create a new section of the website with legal resources, because we don't have that currently.
That would be tremendous, because I think there's this, they know, sorry.
I believe they, the boogeyman, knows that there's an uprising, which is so empowering, but yet there's also this risk of people backing away. I know at times I've been very blinded, not totally sure what are my legal rights. I've never really had to care, but just to have that level of support, I think, would be tremendously helpful as groups are coming together to know what can you say, what can you ask. So thank you for taking the question.
We will do that. That'll be a big high priority. You know, we are not a law firm, okay? We try to do what we do best, and that's one thing I was pointing out. Do what you do best, and what we do best is researching and providing information and publicizing things, bringing people forward on our website and pushing them out into national media to tell their stories. We brought a middle school teacher 2 or 3 months ago who talked about the change in curriculum and how the great authors were pulled out of her school, her middle school. They stopped teaching the Holocaust in her middle school, and instead they literally came in, almost chilling. They literally came into a classroom and started pulling books off the shelves from great authors, Maya Angelou, Martin Luther King, you know, the classics were pulled. Instead, they brought in these pamphlets from some company in Pennsylvania that, she said, focused everything in our history on oppressor versus oppressed. And the result has been an increase in racial hostility in her school. The school she teaches at in Providence is almost 100% non-white, mostly Hispanic. And the students have become very racialized. The teachers have been very hostile to her, and some of the students have even started referring to her, because she's white, as America. How sad is that? They refer, you're America, we're not America. And that's when I talk about what the destructive nature of the society. To have a kid growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, who does not view himself as America because of the color of his skin. That's how destructive this is.
All right, it's getting late. We have one last question, and then we'll let you go.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for coming this evening. I just want to, I have a comment that this room is mainly filled because Coach Flynn is here. I think all of us were shocked when a parent, you know, questioned something that was happening in their child's classroom, who happened to be the coach, and then he was let go as the coach. We were shocked. There was rallies, there was groups, there was Facebook page, Save the Coach. So when you say that one of the things that we can do is to support people that are going through this, I can tell you that this town has done that. We've supported the coach, his family, and everybody being here tonight, and we still do and always will. So I want... And what happened to our great great coach was really what kind of energized all of us in this. But the question that I have for you, sir, is what facilitated his questions was during the Zoom and this remote learning, we talk a lot about the administration, but there are also teachers who are very subtly pushing this agenda on children. There were teachers that were wearing Black Lives Matter shirts, having messages that really shouldn't be in a middle school classroom or a high school classroom. And those are the things that parents were questioning. So when it comes to questioning teachers, I know they're protected by the union, and I know there's some great teachers out there that don't want to be a part of this but are afraid to speak up. But for those teachers who are trying to really indoctrinate our students in subtle ways, is there anything that we can do about that? I mean, are there any rules and regulations that can prevent them from politically indoctrinating students in subtle ways, like wearing political messages or Black Lives Matter shirts or the like? Thank you.
Well, I think you have to check your school's procedures, but I would think most school systems do have some mechanism for a parent filing a complaint, and I would utilize those.
Please do not leave. Earlier, when we started the program, I mentioned that one of the objectives of this event was to begin to identify and recruit people to run for their school committee in their respective towns. And I know that there are a few people that are either have run before and they're going to run again or looking to run for the first time. Becca Gates and Colleen Hines from Dedham. The young lady from Franklin, we don't have your name, but here's the deal. What the hell? I said that, here's the deal. A brain dead fool. If you are interested in running for school committee, because our organization, Norfolk County Republican Committee, there are 28 municipalities that comprise Norfolk County. We are going to do everything we can as a county organization, working with the RTC, the town Republican committees, to identify and recruit and support candidates who are going to run for school committee. I'm a longtime Republican. I'm a Reagan-Trump Republican. But I got to tell you something. I don't give a damn if you're an independent, a Democrat, or Republican. As long as you love this and you love our country and you want to take our country back, which starts with the education of our children, we're going to support you. So if you are thinking of running for school committee in your town, or you're a committed candidate to run, please, when we adjourn in a few minutes, please come up, give us your contact information. We can be in touch with you. Bill mentioned before that the way we're going to succeed is if we start establishing collaborations. And tonight is the first step in this collaboration to help those of you, and there are many of you who are not here, who are thinking about it, that you know, friends of yours, neighbors of yours. Have them come forward. If you go to our website, Norfolk County Republican Committee, or contact any one of us and pick up one of these on the way out. Okay, it'll give you all how you can reach us, whether you become a member or not. We would love to, but just so you have the information how to reach us, send us your information. Tell us what town you're from, that you are interested or committed to running for school committee, and we will do everything we possibly can. Raise money for you, help you organize. This is our mission for 2022 election cycle. So whatever we can do. Good. Raphael.
Hi, everybody. Before you leave, I just want to say a couple of things that I've learned recently. We have a bunch of younger parents in the town, in Foxborough, who are really getting involved and upset about a lot of things that's going on in our school system. And one of the things you can do,
Thank you.
and I've been listening to them, for a couple of months, and finally I reached my saturation point on an issue. So I decided to go to our school committee and make a statement. And well, I went there as a mother, a grandmother, a retired high school teacher, a concerned citizen, and a taxpayer, because you do pay taxes in these towns. So I went to the school committee and I made a statement, and I wanted to support the young parents who were standing up. And a school committee meets every couple of weeks, so I went to the last one also, and I didn't make a statement that time, but I was with other parents there. But I'll tell you what I learned. And this is something I think that's really important, and it's happening in the country. Maybe not a lot yet, but I think it's growing. You have to pay attention to your school superintendents. The meeting I went to, she gave, she put out a little pamphlet of information on her goals. There were 5 goals that she wanted to meet as a superintendent of schools. And I will say a couple of things, it's not going to take me long. Number 1, not one of them was measurable, and not one of them had to do with student improvement. Okay, so that caught my eye. But her first goal was to enter a program, this is a superintendent, on equity leadership training. So it caught my eye. So I went further. Right under that goal, she was going to enroll in a program at Williams James College. I said, what the heck is William James College? Everybody's mentioning Harvard tonight, all these Ivy League schools. This is really important. So I get online, I'm looking up this Williams James College. It's in Newton, Massachusetts. Never heard of it before. Been around here for a lot of years, I guess. It is for equity and leadership training for clinical psychologists, behavioral psychologists, superintendents of schools, and supervisors. And they want to get into the mental health field. This is critical. Please look up the school, please ask your superintendents for their goals, and sit at those meetings. I don't care if you're retired, if you're 90, okay? If you're 30, go every once in a while. Get a schedule so they know people are paying attention, especially if you're a taxpayer and a parent. So please do that. That's what I learned. So I'm going to try to make every one. And it also backs up the parents, the younger parents who are fighting for their kids. That's all I wanted to say. So please.
Again, not to be redundant, but I will. If you are interested in running for school committee, please come up and let us know. If you're here, but you want to support those who are going to run and to protect the education of your children, if we don't have your contact information as you leave, please see Steve and the 2 Steves in the back. Give them your contact information so we can all stay in touch with one another. We'll keep you apprised of what's going on. Somebody else I want to mention, Karen Colton from Needham is running for select board. This is Liz Caponia. Make sure you reach out to her. But again, thank you very, very much. God bless you. God bless America.